Hey guys, Britt here with Full Dad Mode. Today I'm going to show you how we're going to put in this wainscoting or beadboard that we did in my children's playroom. And we also did this great grasscloth wallpaper all along the perimeter. It looks pretty cool and adds style and dimension to your room. Now let's get after it. Here's a list of tools you need to complete this project. Now you might just be interested in doing just the wainscoting or the wallpaper, so I won't bore you with reading each tool. But two callouts. One is you can get by without the laser level, but it does help with the wallpaper in terms of getting the first line set. And two, make sure to get a very sharp utility knife. This is especially helpful when using a firm natural fiber wallpaper. Here's a list of materials you need for wainscoting. These will vary if you opt for a kit rather than beadboard sheets. Also, the number of sheets you need depends on the size of your space. My space required 39 feet of beadboard, but I bought an extra panel in case I made a cutting error around windows or corners. In addition to the paneling, you'll also need nails, grooved cap trim molding, and a tube of finishing caulk. The materials for wallpapering are pretty basic. You just need wallpaper and adhesive, both quantities of which depend on the size of your space. Now, two big tips here is one, buy enough wallpaper to allow for overhang while hanging the wallpaper, and then cut it to the right size. The second is glue, glue, glue. Buy a gallon of glue and spread it on thick. Less is not more. You want a lot so you can move the paper around. Now you're ready to measure your space. First, measure the room walls you're going to cover. Then calculate the number of panels and wallpaper needed. As I mentioned, get an extra panel and extra wallpaper if your space has obstacles to work around. I underclubbed the amount of wallpaper I needed and ended up having to buy an extra 2 rolls. Here's how you plan the wallpaper and paneling placement. For wallpaper, I used grasscloth wallpaper, which is a natural fiber product that does show lines on the edges of each connection point between the pieces. In other words, it's not seamless, so I started in the center of the room. For the beadboard paneling, it doesn't really matter where you start. Just start in a corner and work your way around the room. You will, however, need to trim around the corners because they're never a perfect 90 degrees. Now you're ready to install the wallpaper. If you're avoiding installing wallpaper on this project, just skip ahead to the next section. Also, I'm not an expert at installing wallpaper, so I added links to 3 helpful YouTube videos on how to install wallpaper like a pro. Definitely worth a watch if it's your first time. Use the laser level to mark and display your starting line. This will be your starting point and the only time I used the level. Once I had the first piece installed, I just followed the edge of each last installed piece around the room. Determine how much wallpaper you need by holding it up against your wall and leaving 2 to 4 inches of overhang for your desired size. You'll cut it to size later. Now you're ready to add your adhesive to the paper and the wall. First, unroll your piece of paper on the ground and spread the adhesive with a paint roller. Then bookend the paper to itself very gently. Apply glue to the wall. Remember to spread the glue on thick using your roller. Use a foam brush for the edges. And don't worry about getting glue on the ceiling, it easily washes off. Place the paper on the wall and work it into your desired location, aligning to your starting line. Use your long trim guard to make the paper tight against the wall and ceiling, then cut along the guard for a perfect tight fit. Use your rubber roller to secure the paper to the wall and work out any air bubbles, then use the trim guard to cut around any obstacles. Repeat the process of gluing the wallpaper and wall, then continue to apply the paper next to each previous piece installed. For more detailed tips on how to install wallpaper, check out the other YouTube videos I linked to in the notes below. They were great guidelines for me that helped me learn how to cut around corners and obstacles and are generally, all in all, good resources for how to install wallpaper. Now as I continue along the room here, I used a wallpaper corner seam roller to make a tight fit as I rolled around each corner. I did not cut a line at the corners, as some resources will suggest. I simply used the seam roller to make a tight fit in each corner. It worked pretty well. Once I got one wall done, the rest went pretty smoothly. So let's fast forward and get to the next part of the project, as you might not be doing 4 walls like I did. Now you're ready to install the paneling. First, you're going to cut the paneling to your desired size. I used 8x4 beadboard and cut it in half to make 4-foot tall panels. Skip this step if you're using a kit. Here's a cutting tip. Use painter's tape along your cut line to prevent the MDF from splintering. You only need to tape it on the primed side. Next, use a stud finder to find studs and use painter's tape to mark the studs on the wallpaper above the wainscoting panels. Before I nailed the panels to the wall, I stripped the existing baseboard caulk so I could make a tight fit. Now, I probably should have removed the existing baseboard and installed a grooved baseboard, but sometimes going full dad mode requires living by the mantra, done is better than perfect. So I installed it directly on top of the existing baseboard and it still looks great. Now you're ready to nail the paneling to the wall. Use finish nails to attach the wainscoting panels to the wall, hitting studs as much as possible. You can glue first if you like, but I didn't because glue rips off the drywall if you ever want to remove the wainscoting in the future. Also, I didn't have a nail gun, so I used a hammer and finish nails and a punch to drive the nails in. As you work around the room, you'll run into obstacles. Measure and mark the placement of obstacles like outlets and vents, and make cutouts with a jigsaw. Also, as you install, don't worry too much about nail holes. The top nails will be covered by the trim capped molding that you'll put on top of the beadboard, and the other nail holes we'll cover with caulk later. Now when you work your way into a corner, these can be a little tricky. I used a Dremel scraper to trim the edge of the beadboard panel as needed to make a tight fit. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you can use caulk to make it a nice smooth finish later. As you work your way from edge to edge of the room, you'll eventually need to cut a panel piece to a shorter width. Focus on getting the width as measured, then trim the corner panel as much as needed to get a tight fit. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, you'll caulk the gaps later. Once you have your paneling installed, you're ready to measure and cut the cap molding as needed. Molding generally comes in 8-foot strips, so you'll need to measure and cut as needed to fit the length of your space. Now here's a tip. Buy molding with pre-cut notches to fit squarely against your wainscoting panel. Now as you're cutting your trim, you need to pay special attention for cutting around corners. They can be tricky, and there are different ways to do it. For more tips on how to cut your specific trim type, check out Pinterest because there's a lot of great videos for how to cut trim. Now for mine, I traced the curve of one piece of trim onto another, then used a jigsaw to cut it out and sand it to a smooth finish. On the other piece of trim, I cut a 1/4 inch notch that'll sit right on top of the adjacent paneling. This method allows for a tight fit when joined at the corner. Use finish nails to fasten cap molding trim to the wall, setting flat on top of the paneling. Make sure to hit studs where possible. Continue to follow this process as you work your way installing the cap molding along your wall. Once all your trim is installed, you're ready to caulk any gaps and nail holes. Apply caulk between the panels to cover any gaps. Use your finger for a clean, smooth finish. Then, apply caulk to any connection points of trim pieces. If there are gaps between baseboard and panel, go ahead and caulk that too. Finally, finish the corners and nail holes with caulk as well. So there you have it. Here's the finished product. I added a toy box and a 55-inch flat screen TV to complete the space. I absolutely love it and welcome any questions with your project. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe for more great how-to videos to make the most of life and go full dad mode. Be sure to visit fulldadmode.com for more.